ladies and gentlemen. I will be moderating this session. My name is Tolga from Turkey, and in this session will be about maybe the most popular subject of playing game in 2013 is the match fixing. And we have 6 distinguished guests from different countries and from different backgrounds and experts in their fields. And they will share their stories, provide insight, and provide some research and information on the field to better understand the match fixing environment and what we can do to prevent it or at least minimize it. And first, I would like to introduce you Gamze Bal. She will talk about a very hot topic in Turkey in the last 2 years, which is the match fixing scandal happened in 2011, actually revealed in 2011, and after that created a lot of consequences afterwards. And she will be, I leave the stage to her.
Hello, I'm Gamze Bal. I'm a sports journalist representing Postdoctoral Supporters Union, voluntarily work I'm doing, and I'm coming from Istanbul, Turkey. Today I'll try to describe you the real situation in Turkish football and inform you about what has really happened in the last 2 years since the beginning of one of the biggest ever corruption stories of European football. I guess the scandal seems to be handled in a proper way from a distance, but the truth is that it does not. And you know, there are various definitions for match fixing, but what I like most is the one Graham Picker, the UEFA intelligence officer, used. In a political way, he describes match fixing as cheating to lose. But in some parts of the world, like Turkey, the art of losing isn't hard to master if you possess 3 critical powers, which are politics, economics, and the media. And the main party of Turkish match fixing scandal was holding all of these 3 and made really good use of them. In July 2011, the police investigation uncovered an organized crime syndicate that was involved in fixing several games. Fenerbahçe Sports Club was at the center of the scandal, whose board members were charged with fixing 12 matches in spring 2011, which led Fenerbahçe to win the title ahead of Trabzonspor, with an unbelievable 16 wins out of 17 games in a row. Dozens of officials, including Aziz Yıldırım, the chairman of Fenerbahçe, were arrested, and several players, managers, and agents were also charged in match-fixing probe. After a whole year, the criminal court gave its verdicts in July 2012 and sentenced 21 defendants for manipulating the results of the matches in the certain season. You can see some of the sentences here. Please pay attention to the translator of the club. Although the match-fixing activities in Turkish Super League and Second Division were proved, the sport jurisdiction were manipulated to save the clubs from getting deserved sentences. The laws, regulations, instructions and reports were changed. Activities of individuals and legal entities were differentiated somehow, and thereby the clubs benefited from the fixing activities of their officials were cleared, which sounds unbelievable to me. Fenerbahçe and Beşiktaş were proven guilty as charged by the disciplinary bodies of the UEFA, and they were punished. However, Turkish Football Federation is unwilling to change its, to readjust its unfair and unreasonable decisions due process of law. A sample write-up here, please pay attention. We can narrow down the process of clearing the match-fixer clubs with 3 decisive steps guided by both political and economical desires, together with the help of corrupted media, sports media. Turkish Football Federation was ruled by a former Fenerbahçe board member and a passionate fan, Mr. Mehmet Ali Aydınlar, while the scandal erupted. He resigned after 6 months and told on several TV programs that he did not want to be the president who relegated Fenerbahçe, and not surprisingly, last week he announced that he runs for presidency of Fenerbahçe Sports Club. And latest news from today's newspaper, he declared that he did nothing but protect Fenerbahçe in the process. And in February 2012, he was replaced by Yıldırım Demirören, the former chairman of investigated and convicted Beşiktaş Sports Club. The vice president and manager of Beşiktaş were also charged with fixing games to 2 years in prison. And he was, Mr. Demirören, the current TFF, Turkish Football Federation chairman, Mr. Demirören, was leading the team while the corruption took place. And he was also the name Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan would like to see as the new leader of Turkish football. Here I have to digress from my point a little to express the overall approach of politicians to the case. In November 2011, Turkish Parliament gathered to amend the sports law the Prevention of Violence and Disorders in Sports that came into effect just 7 months ago, in April 2011. Eventually, all sentences that penalize crimes in sports, including mainly match fixings, were reduced. And this was a heartbreaking time for true football lovers in Turkey because it was very obvious why the amendments were done in such a hurry, and accordingly, some of the prisoners were released from the prison. First job of the new federation was to change the disciplinary committees that would decide the penalties for match fixer clubs, and members of professional football discipline committee and ethical committee were replaced. These changes followed by amendments of disciplinary codes that covered relegation penalties for match manipulation and attempts. Fenerbahçe officials, leading newspapers and journalists were forcing federation to change these codes, claiming that Turkish football economy would sink otherwise, in case of relegation of 6 clubs involved in match fixing. And in March 2012, Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan offered a suggestion to Michel Platini during the UEFA Congress in Istanbul. He stated that individuals involved in match fixing should face punishment, warning that sanctions against football clubs could mean the punishments of millions of fans. This idea of the most powerful man in Turkey pointed the method of how the federation should solve the problem and keep the match fixer clubs in top division. As a matter of fact, the federation respectively changed the codes and crossed out the relegation penalty for clubs regarding match fixing attempts. Please pay attention here. Relegation penalty for match fixing attempts were crossed out from disciplinary procedures. And at the same time, at the same hours, President Demirören created a new term and claimed that match fixing activities were not reflected into the pitch. He added, "Thanks God." And in May 2, brand new ethical committee announced its second and final report and limited the match fixing activities with merely attempts, ignoring the first report, which said there were match fixing in 11 games and attempts in 3 others, all related to Fenerbahçe. As I said a few seconds ago, the relegation penalty for match fixing attempts were crossed out just 2 days before the new report. The committee concluded that alleged attempts to fix games had not altered the course of the matches. Later on, Professional Football Discipline Committee punished officials, players, employees and managers of 6 clubs over manipulating, attempting to fix the results of the matches, although it's claimed that professional clubs could not be blamed over the activities of individuals and cleared them all. There is no reason for punishment since the elements of the alleged disciplinary violation have not materialized, the Federation said in its statement. They were looking for the match-fixing evidences only in the reports of referees and the observers of Federation, and this irrational description, irrational approach to match-fixing could mean the end of integrity of the sports, which is the most valuable commodity. As it's very clear, the renewal of federation and the interventions of politics reversed the match-fixing storm and directed it in favor of match-fixer clubs. Recognized with their passion for the game, Turkish people are now feeling that what they watch is not football, it's just a free theater performed by $1 million players. and they lost their faith to the authorities in Turkey. Stadiums are full of posters, banners, and cheerings referring match fixing in almost every game, and clashes between fans are really common. Trabzonspor fans particularly are expecting their title to be returned. They organize demonstrations in several countries of Europe, and they hold protests outside the quarters of the UEFA, FIFA, and Turkish Football Federation. Millions of complaints are sent to the UEFA. Yes, the UEFA excluded Fenerbahçe and Beşiktaş from editions of European tournaments, but the decision-making process was inconceivably too long, and the final verdicts are true but partial. UEFA is yet to make its decisions on individuals. And the leading football authorities should act as soon as possible to kick corrupted figures out of Turkish football. We can give other examples from European countries, like in Poland, Germany, in Italy, in Portugal, in Finland, and many more European countries. Match fixer clubs were immediately relegated, and the officials were banned from football for life. So we can ask here some questions like, what was the worst thing Olympiakos Vula has done to be relegated to the semi-professional league in Greece while Fenerbahçe is still playing in the top division? And what did Juventus, for example, do so inexcusable? Or does anyone remember the Finnish club Tampere United, I don't know how it's spelled, pronunciated, and that was indefinitely suspended from football for accepting payments from a person who's known for match fixing. And we can ask it in another way: what kind of a power keeps match fixing clubs in top division still in spite of everything? And how can Aziz Yıldırım, the convicted Aziz Yıldırım for 6 years in prison for match manipulation, still be the chairman of Fenerbahçe officially? So why does the UEFA play for time when it comes to Turkey? You can easily multiply the questions, but I don't have that much time, and I hope I made my point here. You can see some of the demonstrations here. Platini, the UEFA wake up, they say. In his works, Thoughts, Pascal states that, I'm quoting here, "We cannot give might to justice because might has gainsaid justice and has declared that it's she herself who is just. And thus, being unable to make what is just strong, we have made what is strong just." This passage is a summary of what happened in Turkey in the last 2 years, I guess, and the might of possessing political support, economical potential, and media contribution determine what is just in Turkish football, ignoring the results it may lead to. And now, as I said before, the leading football authorities should act as soon as possible to deliver the justice in Turkish football through law enforcement. Otherwise, the most popular game in sports will gradually become more of a fairy tale than a fair play in Turkey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gamze, for the brief introduction into the match-fixing scandal in Turkey. It's being discussed for 2 years and will be discussed in the future as well, I imagine. And yesterday, Declan Hill said that Turkish football is like a walking dead, and this is one of the reasons why it is a walking dead, considered as a walking dead. And in this case, money was chosen between money and ethics. They had to make a choice, and they chose money in the end. And this is a good example, I think, and many people in other countries can learn from. And our next speaker will be Kevin Carpenter. He is a lawyer and specialized in match fixing and sports integrity and sports betting regulations. And his speech will be about match fixing and the Olympic movement, which is not moving in these kind of things very quickly. Thank you. Sure.
Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, despite being a football referee, which may be more interest to most of you in this area, As I'm British, I spend a lot of my time going around the world either for business or for pleasure, apologising and feeling bad about what my country have done in the past. Sorry we came to your country, we invaded, we left it in a mess and went back to our little island and carried on. So I don't get very often much chance to speak about how good our little island is. On this occasion, I thought it was important, when we talk about match fixing stories from around the world, to talk about London 2012 and what the match fixing and the Olympic movement and how things are going to move forward from here. But let's talk a little bit about what happened at London 2012 in relation to betting integrity and match fixing. There has been for some time in the IOC Code of Ethics a provision in there about athletes not being allowed to bet on the Olympic Games. For the first time, however, what we had here was a provision in the host city contract which said that London 2012, the organising committee, had to have in place regulations in relation to betting integrity and monitoring. This was because, as we heard from Jacques Rogge, the former president of the IOC, in the lead up to the Games, he considered this and was finally convinced, given the largely amateur status of the Olympic Games, that this was the greatest threat to the integrity of the Games. It was also the fact that Great Britain is one of the most liberal jurisdictions in terms of gambling. You'll see it every time you watch a Premier League game, or you go on any of the multiple betting websites, or walk into a shop in the street, how liberal the market is. Thankfully, we have what I will call a relatively good organisation called the Gambling Commission, who regulate sports gambling in the United Kingdom. They were put in charge of setting up the right processes and organisations to deal with betting integrity at the Olympic Games. They had previous monitoring, firstly through the FIFA EWS, limited in scope, extremely, and then now through its international sports monitoring company. But what happened was, they decided to set up what's called the Joint Assessment Unit. This was a mechanism for the collection, collation and assessment of information. That is all. They decided we can only do so much on our own. They brought together a number of interested stakeholders, which range from the Olympic governing bodies, the non-Olympic governing bodies, betting regulators, the police, Interpol, the Gambling Commission, and all in between. Everybody was invited to take part. So as I say there, it's a coordination hub for stakeholders to pass information between them. The challenges that were going to be faced by the Joint Assessment Unit, well, they were going to be twofold. Number one was protecting stakeholder interests. Obviously, you're dealing with a diverse range of stakeholders there, all who have their own agenda, but ultimately they were trying to be brought together to protect the integrity of the Games. And secondly, putting lots of theory, including some from people in this room, into good practice. So how did they do this? Well, their preparation for the Games involved two different areas. Number one, they profiled each and every Olympic sport in terms of whether they had had integrity issues previously, whether this was internal corruption with their governance, whether this was match fixing, whether this was doping. They only had a limited amount of resources. Therefore, they decided to target the ones that came out higher when they had initially investigated the sports for the Olympics. The second one was to get all the stakeholders together and play out a number of scenarios ahead of the Games. No surprises. That's what we didn't want during that 2-week period of the Olympic Games. What they found out during this process was that there were a number of competences and capabilities that the others didn't realise they had or didn't have or didn't work together properly. So this is an important step to take in this regard. They also took the decision that if a threat arose at the Games, the most important thing was a proportional response. What you didn't want was this coming out in the media and the media running wild with any allegations of sports betting, corruption or match fixing. And this is why the media became very much a central tenet of the Joint Assessment Unit. The final practical step they installed in the Olympic Village were interactive e-learning stations where athletes could go and learn about match fixing and sports betting. Now we're going after the Games. The Games were wonderful, as we all know. I'm not biased. Being a Londoner, I was very sceptical, but it was great. For all of you that I'm sure you would agree. We had one high-profile issue as regards sporting match fixing, as I call it, with the badminton. But there were 16 reported issues sent to the Joint Assessment Unit during the duration of the Games. Now, again, being British, because of what we've done previously, these days we're not very good at self-promotion. The Gambling Commission is one such body. They are very good, they produce a lot of reports and give out a lot of good documents. What they don't do is tell people about them. So I'm here to champion this particular report, which for a quasi-governmental body was an unusually frank assessment of how they have performed at the Games, and gave 12 learning points for future Olympics moving forward. As we see there, the levels of legal betting were 10 times higher than during the Beijing Olympic Games. Now, as we say, with ISN, their monitoring service, I don't know personally how much of the Asian market, for example, they monitored, not a great deal, I suspect. So that's the only actual recorded figures we have on the amount of betting, either on traditional bookmakers or on exchange betting. Interestingly, the top 5 sports for betting at the Olympic Games were football, number 1, tennis, basketball, volleyball and athletics. Now, I've just been appointed non-executive director of British volleyball, so that was of great interest to me, and I'll be taking that forward and saying, do you realise how exposed your sport is to volleyball? Just look at London 2012. Overall, what the Gambling Commission said, on reflection, was that there were no major corruption cases uncovered in relation to sports betting, not to say there weren't any. There was also a general consensus that the model could be used for future events and for future Olympic Games and other major sporting events. I want to come back to the relationship with the media. This was extremely important for the functioning of the Olympic Games and for the exchange of information between stakeholders. For example, the media informed the Joint Assessment Unit of issues with the boxing judges during one of the bouts that then made national and international news. The media were a key factor in enabling effective determination and enabling lines of inquiry and dissemination of the information to all different stakeholders. What I must stress, and I stress this to every sports governing body I work with, the media are not generally contrary to the interests of the sport. The reason they go out and do this work is because sports don't have either the powers or the resources to do so. Every major match-fixing case in the United Kingdom has been initiated by the press. So there's no reason to be sceptical, and there's no reason to keep them away with a long arm. You should engage with them at an early stage and put in place proper lines of communication so that if anything does arise, you know first, before it gets out to the public. There were 12 separate learning points, and I just want to draw attention to a couple of them here. The first one was learning point number 8, and this is about licensed betting operators. What they said was, licensed betting operators wanted to be involved with this project, but what you must do is listen to them actively, and interestingly, as if they were holding their hand and giving them a little cuddle, said they want to be reassured that their contribution and efforts are really valued as they go through. I think that goes for all stakeholders. You need to tell them that what they're doing is a valuable part of any integrity unit or mechanism you're running. Perhaps most importantly of all, however, were learning points 4 and 10. They talked about law enforcement, and they talked about the lack of information and knowledge law enforcement had about the threat from match fixing and sports betting. How to run investigations, how to look for it. They didn't know about the gambling markets. This is a major hole in our fight against match fixing at the moment, and having just been to work with FIFA and Interpol, I can honestly say Interpol are doing some good work in this area, but there is a lot more to be done. So, where do we go now? I heard yesterday from good friend Harry over there and other people, there is scepticism about what the IOC are doing in relation to sports betting and match fixing, and the founding working group is one of those people who seem to have taken some time to get the wheels moving. Well, let me just read about what it says in the report in relation to preparation and planning for the future. At paragraph 63 of the report, it says, the importance of detailed operational planning, stakeholder engagement testing, and communication management cannot be overemphasised. The planning will ensure the processes and protocols that form the basis of the model are in place. The engagement will ensure those directly involved understand what needs to be achieved and their responsibilities within the model, and testing will reiterate responsibilities, identify capability gaps, and how those gaps can be addressed. That could well be a mission statement for that founding working group. What they have done in recent times is in May 2013, they finally published under 3 separate headings there some actual formal principles to go forward with. Important ones to draw from there was support for the Convention and international instruments, including the UN on organised crime. They also talked about, despite the Code of Ethics, a new Code of Conduct needed to be put in place. That is not a difficult project. That should be done. I can give them one today, which will work. So they just need to go to the right people and ask the right questions, and we will help in the fight. Thirdly, they talk about a reporting system, which is in place, or will be in place. This is a particular bugbear of mine. No matter what sports governing bodies tell you, athletes and participants in sport are inherently mistrusting of governance in sport, with good reason in some instances, and do not ring anonymous reporting hotlines that the sports run themselves. They must be separate and independent from the sport. I cannot stress this strongly enough. Whether this is going to happen with the IOC, I do not know. I can only hope that that will be the case. We've also recently had the new rules on betting for Sochi for the next year's Winter Olympic Games, which in my legal view are fairly comprehensive, and they leave a good amount of flexibility for the disciplinary commissions should anything arise in that instance. And finally, only last week we saw that Interpol have signed an informal agreement with the Rio 2016 Games to have one of their event management support teams there at all times to help them, not only with match fixing but also with issues of brand protection and other corruption. There will be a memorandum of understanding to follow. So where does this leave us? Well, this is just my opinion. I'll just give you a moment to read that. I would like to highlight that they have the necessary political, social and sporting influence and strength to bring all the key stakeholders under one umbrella. FIFA, in my opinion, does not have the same power. That is one sport. This is a global sport that touches every single nation and is in charge of the biggest event on the world stage every 4 years. If they can really get moving on this issue, then I feel hopeful, at least. And I hope, having heard my presentation, you do too. Thank you very much. There's my details. There's me as a referee, just to prove I do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin, for the presentation and the lessons that we can learn from London 2012 Olympics and the importance of IOC in terms of match fighting against match fixing. And the next speaker will be Salomeja Zaksaite from Mykolas Romeris University. She is a postdoctoral researcher, and she will give a presentation on match fixing criminalization versus the ultimate ratio principle.
Good afternoon. My name is Salomeja Zaksaite. I am postdoctoral researcher, and I am gonna speak about criminalization versus the ultimate ratio principle. And firstly, let me define some words which are on the title, especially for not lawyers. So when I speak about ultima ratio principle, I mean that criminal law should be the last resort while tackling match fixing when other measures do not help. For example, firstly, it should be considered whether match fixing is really dangerous, whether it can be just tactics or strategy, then whether it is a disciplinary violation, and very lastly, whether criminal law is needed while tackling match fixing. And my Structure of presentation will be as follows. First, I will define what is considered as match fixing. Then I will present some shifting interplay between match fixing as tactics of the sport, match fixing as disciplinary offense, and lastly, match fixing as the crime, and define criteria according to which it can be regarded as crime. So, firstly, for now, one of the official, maybe even the single official definition of match fixing is in a Committee of Ministers recommendation, and it is said that manipulation of sports results covers the arrangement of an irregular alteration or the course of or the result of a sporting competition or any of its particular events in order to obtain an advantage for oneself or for others and to remove all or part of the uncertainty normally associated with the results of the competition. Why some words are bolded in blue? I bolded these words because they are somewhat not so uniform and not so clear to everyone, and they might be considered as a kind of subjective or interpretative criteria or some kind of things that might depend on judges or arbiters' discretion. Slightly improved, in my opinion, is the definition presented in draft convention, which was mentioned yesterday. Actually, there are more slides than I'm gonna present in 12 minutes, so the rest of the slides with quotes from draft convention and as well as the link to the draft conventions you will find on Play the Game website, so don't be surprised if I do not present all the slides. But in any case, in my opinion, it is slightly improved, it is more precise. But in any, however, both definitions and probably all the definitions provided for match fixing are quite wide, and they cover a large range of acts not necessarily connected with criminal law. And what is more important, they imply somewhat philosophical interpretative features that depend on discretion, such as jeopardizing the integrity of sport. One may think that one thing may jeopardize more and another thing may jeopardize less. So all along, match fixing is not necessarily a criminal law term, and this is, by the way, these words are in draft convention, that match fixing is not only related to criminal law, also administrative and disciplinary law measures are taken. So now I will tell about some examples. One of the most marginal example that comes from my own experience as a long-term chess player is predetermined draws in chess. And this example I consider as tactics of sport, because in chess these draws are considered as tolerable, and actually no one was punished, and no court practice, no disciplinary proceedings were carried out yet. And the draw in chess means that one player gets half point and another player gets half point. And actually, if both players agree to such draw, usually without any monetary or any other advantage, then that means that they have a free day and they can rest, and then they can fight further with more energy, and they can put their efforts later. So the essence of such draws is that before a game the players agree not to fight or even to rehearse the peaceful game in advance, and such tactics are quite widespread, especially in cases where the design of the tournament is very stressful. This is the first example, so maybe it looks like not very guilty one, but actually for the very similar acts the badminton players were disqualified. This example was presented yesterday and today, so it is quite a widespread illustration, but still I would like to go on further and analyze it in terms of criminalization principle and in terms of even draft convention. So the next step, when manipulations increase their jeoparding features, is a disciplinary offense. And it occurred in London Olympics, where 4 pairs of women's doubles, including the Chinese top seeds, have been ejected from the Olympic movement for trying to throw matches in an effort to secure a more favorable quarter-final draw. And they were disqualified, and Badminton Federation stated that they didn't use their best efforts and they conducted themselves in a manner that is clearly abusive or detrimental to the sport. Actually, a very good example, what could be considered as disciplinary offense, but still some questions are left unanswered. For example, I think that many players should think that the system that in which it is beneficial or profitable even to lose is not a good system as such. And firstly, this question should be addressed to the federation or to the organizers who create such a system. So actually I do not see much difference in playing and not showing your best efforts, and while comparing the chess players who do not play at all. Just chess players are doing that very explicitly. They are primitive but honest, and if they do not want to play, they don't play. And no one punishes them, because everyone accepts that as normal behavior. Still, that normal behavior became not normal in case of badminton and in case of London Olympics. Maybe if chess was Olympic sports, that normal behavior also would become not normal. And actually, I gonna play in European Championship, and it included the rule that the draw cannot be reached until 14th move, and it is called Sofia rules, because it was first introduced in Sofia, so some steps are being taken. But this illustration can show that sometimes manipulations may depend not only on dangerous or not dangerous behavior, but also on certain kind of sports and on time or on aims, certain aims to get into Olympics, etc. The last step, where match fixing is the most dangerous, and it is very much speeches have been told on that, is a crime, and it is important to grasp what criteria should be taken into account while defining match fixing as crime. And actually, criminal law has such criteria. Usually, criminal law textbooks provide the criteria of great harm. In terms of sports, I think that such criteria as abuse of the game or rule play should not be sufficient for criminal liability. And in this context, one of the most doubtful is the corpus delicti, or body of crime, of manipulations of sports competition through coercion in the draft convention. Here is the quote from draft convention. Again, some things bolded in blue. Maybe these things might be also subjective to some discretionary criteria. And what is the most interesting, so how we defined coercion. Actually, the people who are in sports usually understand that coercion exists almost every time. For example, sports players as themselves are vulnerable. They often depend from their coach, and if coach advises to do or not to do one or another, usually players have to listen to the coach unless they do not want to play in a team. So coercion in sports sense might be very wide. And in my opinion, if coercion is understood very broadly, for example, as abuse of power or of a position of vulnerability, maybe the latter is the most important in terms of sport, because players are usually those who are vulnerable, and then it comes to a question of what should not be regarded as coercion. And if we remember the same example of badminton players, actually I do not know anything about the coach, but I am almost sure as a player of about 22 years that these women were advised by their coach not to show their best efforts, and maybe in humoristic fashion or not, but they had to listen to that. And actually, it is purely disciplinary offense. I do not see anything criminal in that, but if we understand the coercion very broadly, then according to the text, the legata, we cannot differ that much what should be coercion in criminal law sense and what should be coercion in sports law sense, and then using coercion leads to only disciplinary liability, and then using coercion leads only to crime. So one must be cautious, especially that those apply the law. If harm is understood too broadly and applied too vaguely, then criminalization of match fixing can become a selective measure for overly discretionary punishment, and in turn the principle of ultima ratio is potentially violated. So to sum up, criminal law as a last resort or as ultima ratio can be applied only when the harm of the offense is relatively big. And I think that this example of London Olympics is clearly do not get into that big harm criteria. And only disciplinary law is applied when the harm is not enough to the dangerous act to be criminalized. And when manipulations are considered as recognized tactics of the sport, no liability is to be applied. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Salomeja, and I think that discussion is very important in many cases when we talk about match fixing, because we see that there are very different types of match fixing or changing the result of a game. As you say, one of them is coercion. And our next speaker is Katarina Pijetlovic. She's from Tallin Law School from Estonia. She's an associate professor of sports law there, and her subject will be the Kafkaesque enforcement of a uniform tennis anti-corruption program.
Well, I'm Katarina Pijetlovic of Tallin Law School, and good afternoon. Thank you for coming to hear about the Kafkaesque enforcement of uniform tennis anti-corruption program. A lot has been said and written about match fixing, and one aspect that has been completely overlooked is the fundamental rights of athletes in the investigation of match fixing charges. The European Commission, in its policy document, has confirmed that fundamental rights such as the right to fair trial and proportionality of sanctions are to be protected in the fight against doping, and this by analogy can be applied to match fixing as well. Tennis has gone somewhere recently to establish a system of prosecution and investigation of corruption of offenses. First of all, the Tennis Integrity Unit was established by the 4 tennis governing bodies. And then they adopted Uniform Tennis Anti-Corruption Program, and there was an anti-corruption hearing officer who was then appointed, and he's also financed by the Tennis Integrity Unit. And however, in 2012, the EU Commission labeled tennis as one of the most affected sports in regard to match fixing. I'm not expecting you to be able to read this small print, and this is so-called beginning of season players agreements, or it's actually called also a commitment agreement. This is what every single tennis player out there signs in the beginning of season, and what it contains is several type of clauses. One is arbitration clause, where tennis players give up their rights to appeal any of the decisions of tennis governing bodies in the courts, and then they're also tying themselves to all the official rule books, and including the anti-corruption program and anti-doping program as well. And what the Swiss federal tribunal, which is a Supreme Court in Switzerland. And it is also the only body with competence to review the awards of Court of Arbitration for Sports, said about that agreement is that the clause by which players waive their rights to appeal in courts is void. And the reasoning is important in this case. They said it is void because players are not signing the agreement as a matter of free will, and because such contract has never been negotiated and there is no bargaining power by the tennis players. So the tennis players are just being put in a take it or leave it situation. They are given that contract in the December and they are expected to return it. And there are about 2,000 professional tennis players out there, only 3 to 5 of which return the signed agreements before the season begins. What happens with the rest 2,000 is that they are prompted by the ATP staff just before their first match, when they arrive to the first tournament of the season, and they're saying, basically they're put in that position where they have to sign or not go out on the court. And yes, they don't have any power to affect the terms of that agreement. They want to play tennis, they have to sign it. And if you want to take the judgment in Cañas seriously, that means that nothing that tennis players sign in that agreement is valid and enforceable against them, including anti-corruption program and including anti-doping code, because nothing has been negotiated with them. That has been the reasoning of the court. Regardless of this judgment, nothing has changed. So the tennis governing bodies still present in exactly the same manner this agreement to the players, and the court was right. There is no representation, the proper representation in the ATP. There is a board of directors that has power to decide on the issues, and they are populated by, on the behalf of players, commercial actors, on the behalf of players. There are 10 players who are current professionals, but they have no power whatsoever. So they can be consulted and their opinion can be rejected as well. So what is it that they are signing exactly by that agreement? They agree that they will be prosecuted, investigated and judged by the same body, meaning that the body that will make a decision in the case will be the anti-corruption hearing officer that is appointed, financed by the other party to the dispute. So we are not having exactly the independence or the fair trial criteria fulfilled. And further, they agree that they may become a subject to criminal charges, criminal sanctions. They may be interrogated, they may be investigated by the former Scotland Yard detectives, by the way, that work in Tennis Integrity Unit, but that the charges against them have to be proven only to the lowest standard of proof available in the legal system, which is preponderance of evidence, also known as balance of probabilities, which just means that you have to prove the charge is correct or probably correct 51%, and there is a 49% of possibility that the event didn't take place. So this will be enough to impose a lifetime ban on a tennis player, and this will be enough to impose punitive fines that are exceeding a player's career's earnings. And this doesn't really sound as half as bad, maybe, unless you put it in some context. In the abstract, it sounds bad, but when you look at Köhlerer case, for instance, you can see the practical implications of this. And you might know Daniel Köhlerer as the first tennis player ever to get banned for life for alleged attempted match-fixing charges. This was the first offense of this kind, and he also got $100,000 fine for this. And this is as much as the public was told, because anti-corruption hearing officer and tennis integrity unit keep all their activities strictly secret. Decisions are secret as well. We don't know how and why are they deciding what they're deciding. So I'm going to tell you how this was decided. You can't really read this anywhere. there were 2 witnesses, and one witness was allegedly approached at the breakfast buffet by Köhlerer, who asked him, allegedly, to throw a match. And then he didn't report this, although the anti-corruption program requires players to immediately, without hesitation, report all the approaches to match, to engage in match fixing. He did not report this until a few days later when he lost to Köhlerer. And then immediately after the match, he stormed to report the offense. And the first report suggested that there was a money offer involved. However, later on, the story was changed, and it turned out that there was no money offer. There was a huge conflict by that witness with himself. And the Veino Desnik, which you might know as the guy who was caught with a human growth hormone on the Australian border trying to, and he received 2 years ban, but then he was called to testify as supporting witness to this guy, the first witness, and what he said was thrown out of the testimony as completely unreliable, because everything that he said was basically verifiable as false. This was a witness number 1. And the fact that Köhlerer said he would like to win a match in front of his home audience counted as attempted match fixing. So there was no money offer at all. And there was a witness too who said he received a phone call, and he doesn't know how did Köhlerer get his number. They weren't friends. He got his phone, got a phone call number 1. He got a phone call number 2. He offered him some money, he says, but he doesn't know how to cite the amount. Said he forgot, and when he was asked to give his phone for examination, he refused. He said no, just like that. And Tennis Integrity Unit didn't push. They didn't produce a single hard evidence. It was just word against word. It was a bunch of witnesses that conflicted themselves and conflicted each other. And the anti-corruption hearing officer relied on his own gut feeling to say, well, Köhlerer is breaking rackets, he's cursing on the court, he's been a nuisance to the tennis for a long time, and he's misbehaved so badly that John McEnroe seems like a well-behaved tennis player in comparison. This was something that stretched throughout the decision. The fact that the guy was just overly emotional, which didn't have really anything to do with the match-fixing charges. But that's all evidence that was produced. There was nothing else on Köhlerer. This is it. Because of this, and only this, he was banned for life and fined $100,000 for allegations that were based on word against word. And the anti-corruption hearing officer said that he has been able to reach this decision only because of that low standard of proof. And he said that if any other standard of proof was available, such as comfortable satisfaction or beyond reasonable doubt, which is normally used in criminal investigation, criminal offenses, he would not be able to reach this decision. So he just preferred the other guys with statements. That's it, nothing else. And he just assumed that since Köhlerer's phone turned out that they never made such phone calls, well, maybe he just borrowed the phone. And if you compare this with other cases, you will see that Daniel Köhlerer and David Savic had exactly the same decisions, more or less. And then there were 2 people who were also accused and charged with the same offense. However, look at their sanctions. They received 6 months suspension and $3,000 for Coppola and $5,000 for Renard, which is, pretty mild in comparison. Same offenses. And then you have a Katarina Bukova who was not reporting some approach via email or through her blog. Somebody just approached her. She seized the communication and she got more suspension than the woman who did the same thing as the guys who were banned for life. It doesn't make any sense, but we don't know the reasoning because all of these things are secret. Why? And I urge you to read this article in New York Times. it says that ATP knew that star players were tied to betting, some of the very top tennis players. There are documents out there that are right now sealed by the US courts in Florida, and that prove that some of the high-ranked players were maintaining the gambling accounts in their name. ATP, of course, as usual, declined to comment. We would like to know the names of these players. I'm going to skip through this. And how am I doing with time? I'm done. Okay, if there are any questions, then there will be a Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Katarina. And it was very interesting because many discussions are about how to punish the match fixers or and how to keep them. Your presentation was more about thinking the other side as well, in terms of trying to be protective. Maybe you may harm some basic human rights of players. And thanks for the presentation. And the next speaker will be Deborah Unger. She's from Transparency International. She is manager of the Rapid Reaction Unit. And her presentation will be about staying on site, anti-corruption plus sports organizations working to prevent match fixing through education, which is a very, very important part, I believe, in fighting against match fixing. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Thanks for inviting me here, and thanks all you lot for coming to hear about this program that we're doing. I'd like to talk a little bit about the project Staying On Side and why we got involved with it and how we're working with the Bundesliga and the EPFL and the role of education and prevention in tackling match fixing. We've heard other speakers talk about the nuts and bolts of organised crime and how prevalent match fixing is and the extent of the problem, and I think that no one in this room doubts the threat to the sport of football. What I would like to do today is give a quick overview of the project and why we are doing it, and I'll take a few minutes to explain how we became involved in this area. Transparency International is probably best known for the index rating, how corrupt countries are, the Corruption Perception Index, the perceived level of corruption in the public sector in countries around the world. But in our 20 years experience, we've developed into far more than a one-index outfit. We are at heart an advocacy organisation, a research evidence-based advocacy organisation, with the ambitious mission, as I said this morning, of ridding the world of corruption. That is a very ambitious mission. And we try to go about it in very specific ways. We use this evidence-based research to push those in power, in government, in corporations, and more recently in sporting organisations, to make fighting corruption a priority, which generally means reforming the way they go about their businesses, introducing specific laws in the case of countries, and adhering to principles that we believe are very, very important in the fight against corruption. Our name is not Transparency International for nothing. We believe a great deal in access to information, whistleblower protection, and upholding the rule of law. These are all areas of governance that can be addressed by sporting organisations. We give advice. Sometimes it's not heeded, as it was the case with FIFA, and we explain why it is important to offer solutions, and primarily in the form of guidelines on how to identify corruption risks and then how to prevent them. Staying on side is our attempt to do that. in the world of match fixing. And we take a specific approach to this. We look at the demand side of bribery in this case. It's squarely focused on the bribe-taking end of match fixing, the people who are at risk to take the bribes. And that is why it's important that we work with people inside football. And that's why we're working with the EPFL and the Bundesliga. The other projects that we're involved, we got involved last year when the EU put out a call for proposals. And there are 5, European Commission, there are 5 projects involved in this. And all the other projects are really with people working in sport. We are the only lead partner from outside of sport that's involved in this project. And we think that we bring a different perspective and perhaps one that can benefit those inside sport. For several years now, our chapter in Germany, however, has been working alongside the Bundesliga to develop a curriculum and a program to present to players and officials involved in sport to talk about how to prevent match fixing. And this led to a project which is in its pilot stages, and it's this that we used as a basis for what we're doing within our project in the EU. And this, I guess, is what we'd say are the main reasons why we're doing this. It's not surprising that Transparency International would want to work in sport. Sport is a great way to reach lots of people, particularly young people, and to talk about integrity and fair play, and to instill the kind of a life message that helps fight corruption. In fact, sport is used so much as a metaphor for life that its associations need little explanation. And in the fight against corruption, as in the fight against match fixing in sport, we have years of experience that shows that education and prevention are have two very important roles. They raise awareness of the risks, and by doing that, they stop some people from making life-destroying mistakes. No one is claiming that prevention will rid the world of match fixing. No one. Prevention is not a cure-all, but it's a good first step that shows that education is a good first step to make the vulnerable aware of what the risks are. And good risk management is what business would call it. It clearly has to work in conjunction with law enforcement and policing. There's no denying that. And I won't go into why match fixing is greater today. That's something many of the other speakers have done. But I will say that everybody has stressed the need for prevention. And that's what we think we bring to the party. Also they have stressed the need for collaboration, whether it be in the organised crime end of things, where people have to work together to share information, or whether it be in the awareness raising and prevention game. We have to work together in order to do this. No one can do it alone. So, staying on side is being piloted in these countries. What we have is a Transparency International chapter working alongside a different football league. They're all part of the EPFL. And they will be working on various projects between now and the end of the program, which is in April. And they will decide between themselves what they will do, whether it will be an educational program that they will then present to a pilot group of target audiences, whether that's young players, whether that's match officials, whether it's clubs themselves. And they will be having a few public events to talk about what they're doing. We're also working with leagues in Norway, Poland, France, and Russia who also want to benefit from this project. And what we will be doing next year is presenting the results of where we are. We haven't had that many events yet, so I can't really update you on exactly how the project is going. It's taking a while to get off the ground. People are doing a lot of talking and doing a lot of working together to work on the ground rules of how they're going to go forward. The German project is by far the most advanced. It was started before this project got underway, and they have worked a lot further on to these goals. We want to develop partnerships between anti-corruption and sporting organisations, because we do think we have some advice that would be useful to hear. We want to add the experience that we've gained, and we want to pilot a curriculum and materials. This is the English version of the German training documents. Now, what it does and what these pilot curriculums do is essentially introduce ethical ideas into how you go about dealing with actual practical situations. They don't specifically pick out a match-fixing dilemma and say, okay guys, if you were asked to be bribed for a match, what would you do? They start much smaller than that. They start with ideas about ethics. What would you do if you were asked to bet on someone on the pitch scoring a penalty in a training session, and you pass cash around doing that? Is that a good idea? Let's discuss it. Don't have a right or a wrong answer. Let's discuss it. Should we play poker on the bus to an event, to a match? And if we do play poker on a bus, should we have cash stakes there? And how much should these be? And is that a good idea? And if you have a young player traveling with older players, should you involve them in a poker game on a bus? Because you've got a lot of time, you've got an awful lot of competitive instincts. Sports people love to gamble. There's no two ways about it. That's why they're in, half of the time, that's why they're in sports. So what these programs do, present these ethical dilemma situations and raise a discussion. Now, we're all very well aware that this is not something that sports people like to sit down in a classroom and, you know, give an hour session with people who'd rather be out on the training pitch. So we've got to develop the best ways to get this information across. And maybe by the end of the project, we'll have a better idea of what works and what doesn't work. But we're starting from the point of view that you introduce the idea of ethics, you introduce the idea of what's good, what's not good, what could compromise you, what are the risks, and you get people to think about that, and that's the first step. So the German project developed 6 key points and key principles, which are sort of basically from standard codes of conduct. Don't bet on your sport, don't let others bet for you, knowledge is valuable, don't trade in insider information, don't fix a game, have trust, understand the consequences. These are just sort of basic principles of how you go about your sporting life. But they also introduced something called a sports ombudsman for football in the Bundesliga. And this ombudsman is independent from football. In Germany, he's a former referee, he's a lawyer, he's funded by the football DFL Bundesliga, but he is separate from them. And the kids or anybody involved in football who has a problem can call him. They don't have to go through their club. I think Kevin made the point that if you have to go through the organisation to which you belong, you may very well not want to tell them you are having problems. Now, he's there to talk about all sorts of problems. If people get involved in gambling, if they are approached, if they're in over their head with something that they don't understand, they've made a group of friends who are not good for them and it looks like they might be vulnerable to something, they can go to him and talk about that, and he can then decide what kind of advice to give them and where they should go in the future. And I think it's the independence of this, and that's Transparency International. We would very much advocate that that is something that other leagues should think about. I think that's a very good idea. And we've started running workshops, or TI Germany along with the Bundesliga have started running workshops at various clubs in Germany to present this program and see how it works. They're doing evaluations right now, and we haven't got the evaluations at the moment. So this is a recap of some of the things that they might do in their dilemma sessions and some of the issues that might spur the conversation that could lead to a situation where they are greatly at risk to be the bribe taker in a match-fixing situation. So, we presented at the MINEPS conference this rather nice poster about joining forces together to prevent match-fixing through education and working with sports organisations. We're trying to raise awareness. That's one of the best things that we can do in this. What we don't want is for clubs and leagues to think that talking about match fixing means that they have a problem. We want this message to be inverted, to say that talking about match fixing can be talking about what we're doing to prevent match fixing, and that is a good policy. It's not because we have a problem within our clubs. Now, they all might have problems anyway, but we have to get press and the media on our side to realize that just bringing up the issue of match fixing does not necessarily mean it's a problem. It means that people are aware that it could be a risk and they're doing something about it. Our next steps will be to evaluate the results, streamline our materials, make them available in more languages, and keep the conversation going. It's only an 18-month project, and we hope that this will then be something that can be rolled out in more and more leagues in more and more countries. I think I'll just stop there. Thank you.
I would love to see the results of the what you are doing, what you have started already, and I would love that your Turkey office is more involved in sports in the future, maybe. Yeah. And the next speaker is Karen Jones from Asar Institute. She is the academic program coordinator, researcher, and managing editor in this institute. And her presentation is reward for injury bond scheme in the NFL as a form of match fixing.
I'm just getting picked up here. Okay. Hello, everyone. First of all, I have to confess that I purposely chose a somewhat salacious title. So, but I am going to talk about the NFL bounty scheme. But I'm talking about it in the context of defining match fixing. So, I'm not going to talk about the problem of match fixing. I think that that's been pretty well covered over the past few days. I do want to talk more about defining match fixing and the whole issue of having a more universal definition of match fixing. And I'll use the US NFL bounty scheme situation to try and make my point. And then finally, I'd like to offer some of the benefits that I think are available from a more universal definition, as well as provide some conclusions. So the current situation is that there really is no universal definition of match fixing, and I know that's a little bit deceptive, because if I asked all of you what is match fixing, I think we'd all pretty much come up with a consistent kind of response. You know, basically saying the manipulation of the outcome of a match, you know. But I think it does go a little bit deeper than that. We have a lot of definitions of match fixing from international sports organizations, national sports organizations, we have European level organizations, and I'm going to go over a few of these to draw out some of the key elements. Now, I guess this whole situation also begs the question, do we actually need to define match fixing? And you know, I'm still kind of on the fence, and so maybe we don't really need to define it. Maybe we do just continue in the way that we have continued really over the past several years, and basically saying, well, you know, if you see it, you know, match fixing, well, when it presents itself, you know what it is. And at one point, I would say about a year and a half ago, there was a whole lot of buzz around defining match fixing. There was this urgency because this growing problem that has really always existed, but this growing problem, and there was this real urgency to define it. But I think we really kind of jumped over into solution and kind of missed one of the fundamental steps, and that's really looking at it, again, from more of a universal perspective and really taking time to actually define it. So some of that sense of urgency to define, in my opinion, has died down. And what is match fixing? As I mentioned, we'd all probably come up with a similar definition at this point: manipulation of sports matches. But again, the national codes and laws, there is no universal definition of corruption, okay? But the difference there is that national codes and laws all address corruption or fraud, but not all address match fixing. So that's another kind of deficit in all of this. And I should have started off by explaining that this is one small issue that I'm dealing with in my larger PhD research. So this whole typology, I'm not going to go through. Okay, this is to make a bigger point, but it is relevant here just to show you that in this typology, match fixing is the only area that is specific to sport. And I think that is a relevant point, especially when you're talking about defining something like match fixing and identifying why, in the context of national codes, that match fixing is not necessarily something that's identified. So there are several definitions out there on match fixing. I'm only going to go through a few of them, only to point out some relevant parts. I've underlined some of the relevant language, and as Salomeja, and we had not compared notes, but I think we've actually underlined some of the same areas. I'm going to take a drink of water because my throat is getting dry. So, so this definition by the Council of Europe identifies match fixing, or the manipulation of sports results, and it covers the arrangements of an irregular alteration of the course of or the result of a sporting competition or any of its particular events to obtain an advantage for oneself or others, removing all part of uncertainty normally associated with results of the competition. So this is the Council of Europe. Now, the Australian sports minister, again, similar definition, but certainly some distinctions to be made here. Australian sports minister, match fixing involves the manipulation of the outcome, again, common language, or contingency by competitors, teams, etc. Such conduct includes, so in this definition, they actually go into a list of different activities that can fall under the umbrella of match fixing, and interesting enough, they also include one of the activities associated with betting. So that's of interest there. Now, the National Action Plan Against Match Fixing, the definition that was arrived at under that plan was match fixing is defined as, again, manipulation of a sporting competition where the actors involved seek to manipulate the outcome of the competition or a single aspect of the competition for financial gain. Again, I think the parts that I've underlined here are relevant: manipulation, sporting competition, manipulate the outcome, and financial gain. Then finally, excuse me, just one more definition. European Commission report on match fixing looks at or defines match fixing as the manipulation of sports results, covers the arrangement of an irregular alteration of the course or the result of a sporting competition or any of its particular events in order to obtain financial advantage and remove all or part of the uncertainty normally associated with the results of the competition. Now, if we draw out the key characteristics that really all of these definitions identify. One is manipulation. Okay, another one is within the context of a sporting competition. The other is irregular alteration of the course of the result of the game. And then to obtain financial advantage, so there's some sort of monetary gain, either to the one involved in the manipulation or someone that they're aware of. And then removing all or part of the uncertainty normally associated with the results of the competition. And so, now this brings us to the NFL, the U.S. football bounty scheme. That's also known as Bountygate. Okay, basically in 2012, the NFL concluded an investigation that found that the New Orleans Saints football team out of the U.S. had engaged in what they were referring to as a pay-for-performance scheme. And essentially what was happening was that the head coaches were all in cahoots on this. So the head coaches were paying their players if they caused serious injury to a key opposing player. And there was a whole scheme around payment. Certain types of injuries, they received certain types of payments. If a key opposing player that they had identified beforehand was actually injured, taken out of the game, I mean, that was like the grand prize. So, and still, relatively speaking, we're talking about a very small amount of money if you know how much NFL football players make. So, so the top of the chart, you may be talking about a $20,000 bonus, US dollars. So, but that's besides the point. The main point here is really looking at this type of scheme. So in this situation of paying players outside of their contract, okay, so these are additional bonuses that are paid outside of their contract, whether this type of activity is considered match fixing. Okay? So, I don't really have a clear answer to it, but what I would suggest is that we kind of go through the list, the characteristics of match fixing. So the first one is manipulation. And so I think one of the big questions there is, can overperformance or extraordinary efforts be considered manipulation? Okay, because in this case, or certainly in the case of match fixing, we always think about underperformance, tanking, not giving your best efforts as being the manipulating factor, the activity that's involved in match fixing. But here we have overperformance. Someone really taking extraordinary measures to try and facilitate or change the results of the game, or impact the results of the game. So next, within the context of a sporting competition, I think that one's clear. We're talking about activity. Yes, the scheme was devised off the field, but the actual activities took place on the field. So I think it's fair to say that component of match fixing, or that characteristic of match fixing, is actually achieved. And then irregular alteration of the course of the result. Now this is another one that's a little bit sticky, because does purposely targeting key players for injury suffice? Is that enough to achieve a regular alteration of the course of the result? And I should also add, for those of you who may not be familiar with U.S. football, U.S. football is an aggressive sport. Okay, it's a very aggressive sport, it's a team sport, and most of the game, the players are tackling each other. Okay, so one of the issues here, when you're talking about irregular alteration of the course of the outcome or the result, does targeting those players, those key players, or going in with the intent to cause serious injury, does that sufficiently alter the course of the result? Now, something I would add here, well, actually, I'll add it as we add to the last point. So, I think the other piece that's clear here is to obtain financial advantage. Although there was a lot of discussion about the financial advantage actually provided here, because it was such a small amount compared to the amounts that the players are paid under contract. But this was such a small amount, so there was some question as to whether it could really be considered financial advantage. But I think in the course of all of this, once you go through the facts, I think we can rest assured that part is pretty satisfied. And then removing all or part of the uncertainty normally associated with the results of the competition. So again, this is another point that's a little sticky, because is this actually removing the uncertainty? Okay, or is it just strategy? Okay, and what I mean by that is when you decide, okay, even if you have key players that are targeted, and particularly in one game, Brett Lefevre was actually, they say in terms of the bounty, I'll tie it to my title, that bounty was placed on him. Meaning that, if somebody were to cause him injury in this 2010 championship game that removed him from the game, I think they were going to pay them $20,000. So a bounty was actually put on specific players. But even having said that, does simply placing that bounty on a particular player or targeting certain players, does that remove the uncertainty that would automatically be associated with the game? That one, I think, is a difficult one to show, because the targeting a player for injury, it may or may not happen, so there's still uncertainty there. Even if he's injured, not certain that he's going to be taken out of the game. So there is still uncertainty there, but again, this is one. It says removing all or part of the uncertainty. So maybe giving that extra effort in and with the specific intent to cause injury, maybe it does remove part of the certainty. So or part of the uncertainty. So anyway. So again, is this match fixing? Coming back to that question. And the bottom line is, in my opinion, under the National Action Plan definition, where the whole piece about uncertainty is not part of that definition, then I would say probably yes. But under the European Council definition, then I would suggest probably no. Now, let's see. I also wanted to mention, and as Salomeja mentioned earlier, the draft convention. The definition is a little bit more, at least where they are right now with it, is a little bit more specific. but in my opinion, it still leaves a lot of ambiguity. So I think we would still have the same issues. And the bottom line is that having a common definition, a universal definition, would help establish consistency. It would also allow us to develop better public understanding of what exactly is meant by match fixing. And it helps to clearly define the problem. I think it was Declan Hill on Monday that mentioned that there really are kind of degrees of match fixing. And I think that's something that really needs to be put into the definition, because I think you have match fixing, you have, but then you have betting related match fixing, and you could probably come up with 3 or 4 other categories of match fixing. And in my opinion, the NFL bounty situation would and should fall into one of those. And then also, it helps to support national law development. As I mentioned, match fixing is something that occurs only in the context of sport. And so at the national level, it would make sense that a lot of the national laws would not address this. And that's why it's so important that, that international sports federations address it. And most of them have at this point. And that has been pushed down to the national sports organizations. But again, this issue of consistency. I think the consistency is less so outside of Europe, because I know that UEFA and FIFA and some other European sports organizations have come together and agreed to use a common definition. But again, I think there's more work that can be done there. And then also it contributes to harmonization, because these issues are going to continue to come up, especially when we're talking about going from country to country, nation to nation. And if the definitions are just a little bit different, then those problems will arise. And then consistency in measuring effectiveness of match-fixing efforts. And the bottom line is that you can't measure and you can't manage what you haven't defined. So that's another issue. And basically, bottom line to all of this is that it supports good governance. The starting point of being able to govern anything is defining it. So in conclusion, again, you cannot effectively manage what you don't measure or what you don't define. And the NFL bounties probably would not rise to the level of match fixing, but it does suggest the need for a clear or a clearer definition of match fixing. The European Convention or the Draft Convention on match fixing might do a better job of defining it, but again, I don't think it goes quite far enough. And that whole idea of you know it when you see it, well, that does not support good governance. It doesn't support the development of laws, and it certainly does not support public understanding or consistency. And thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We have seen that many players not getting motivated to injure the other player, but I've never seen unless the bonus use injure some key players. This is something more about motivations. And thanks a lot for all these presentations, and now we will go to the question and answers. And if anyone has a question, please introduce yourself and your institution, if you represent here, please.
Bastian from Basketball Australia. Karen, does American football not have some principle that you are not to bring the game into disrepute? Is trying to perhaps bring some kind of match fixing, a blunt instrument when they already have something in place to sanction people for doing this?
Actually, oops. Oh, that, okay, yes. Okay, sorry. Yeah, no, actually, no, and let me also make clear, I don't necessarily support that we need to bring something new into the arena. I think we need to define what's there. So, so I do want to make that point. And certainly, I think as in any sport, you know, there are always rules around, you know, making sure that you're playing within the rules of the game. So, and actually, coming out of the court cases, the arbitration cases, there were comments about the egregiousness of the acts of the players. So I think that it was recognized that what had been done in this situation went way beyond what should have occurred in the normal course of play. So, so I think, I don't know what type of impact a more clearly defined match-fixing definition would have had in the NFL bounties situation, but I do feel that defining it more clearly would make the whole situation of match-fixing kind of brought more to the forefront for, you know, across the world. Because quite honestly, just out of curiosity, how many of you were aware of the NFL bounty situation? See, that's not even half the people in this room. But see, that's what I mean. I think this should be part of the whole discussion about match fixing, because it does have those characteristics.
And in addition to this, I can say, for example, we have two different words for match fixing in Turkey. You know, that's another thing maybe, and people understand it much better. One is just if you are paid to lose, and if you are paid to win. That's also, they have different names, so people understand it much easier if you use one of the terms. And if we had one word, maybe that would maybe more difficult to understand, and would ask which way.
Right,
or
right.
was payment for.
Well, and so the NFL bounty situation would not even meet one of your definitions.
Probably not, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, please.
My name is Simon Pallesen from the Danish School of Media and Journalism. I have a question for Ms. Gamze Bal. What kind of impact has it had for Turkish football that people now see it as kind of a theater?
Because people now think that what they see is not football, because they know the results. They've seen one of the biggest ever corruption stories of European football, but the leading authorities in Turkey, I mean the federation, I mean the Turkish parliament, has not done anything to punish the match-fixing clubs that were proved, that there was concrete evidences, but they didn't act in terms of law. So now I'm a football fan. I was watching all the games since they say I'm 25. But in the last 2 years, I'm just watching my team's matches, because I know it's something. When you know the results of a game, you don't want to watch it, you know. And people think that it's all been settled now in Turkey, and whatever you do, we play 34 games in a league in the season, but I think now, if Trabzonspor, for example, my supporter team, and the victim of the match fixing are considered, if Trabzonspor wins 34 games of its 34 games, it would not be led to crown champions, because there are something secret apart from playing football in the pitch, and there are some secret things going on behind the curtain. So we don't believe in football. If we don't believe in clean football in Turkey now, we don't believe in fair play in Turkey. Sorry for my excuse my poor English, by the way.
Hi, it's Khaled Ali from ESA. It's an association of sports betting operators. Kevin, I was actually involved in the IOC negotiations, and I can tell you from a betting operator's point of view, trying to get them all together from not just the UK but Europe was a challenge, but we did all get together and we signed up to a number of principles for that. And you're right, it was a fantastic effort, great coordination by all the participants. But my question is, going forward, one of the challenges I think is going to countries such as Brazil, where there's not actually a betting market. And the reason that this worked in the UK is because we had the UK Gambling Commission, which was helping to push this. Brazil is a closed market, prohibited, and we're already seeing some challenges for the World Cup next year. We've been in talks with FIFA about doing something, and they've told us, look, this is going to be very, very difficult to do something similar from what's happened with the IOC in London to doing something in Brazil. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And Karen, really interesting presentation. Something very similar, I think, happened in Europe a few years back, involving Real Madrid and Jose Mourinho, who asked his players to get sent off in the group stages of a Champions League game, so that the next game was basically meaningless because they'd already won the group, but then in the next round they would have their players back for the next match. And from a betting operator's point of view, I would see this as inside information. Just thought I'd leave that with you.
So, thanks Khalid. Coming back to Rio, so the same clause will have been in the host city contract for Rio, so they were an obligation to take action. If the words of the new IOC president, Thomas Bach, are anything to go by, then he is very, that's one of his main policy objectives in this area. So I don't know about the politics with the Gambling Commission, but if I were them, I would be reaching across the waters and leading in Brazil and saying to them, we have this document, as I say, it's not been well publicised at all, and I think Britain has a chance to lead the way on this topic, because if the Gambling Commission can show other nations that don't have any experience in betting how to manage this process for the biggest show on earth, then that puts in a very strong position on all topics, not just because obviously there are going to be other countries where there are issues, Russia for the World Cup, Sochi or other countries, but I would hope that we will take the lead. But that's again about resources.
Oh, and I, just in comment to your statement, I would say that again supports the need for really being, developing categories of match fixing, so that we're not just all calling it manipulation of the outcome of the game.
I don't know if you had a chance to look at the UK Gambling Commission did a consultation, I think last year or the year before, where they actually looked at this area of match fixing and inside information, and there was a spectrum of the different levels of match fixing, which might be interesting for your research.
Yes, thank you.
Khalid, am I right in thinking that consultation has not been closed?
No, I don't know what's going on with that.
The consultation paper came out, it's not going anywhere, which is bizarre, really. So I'll keep an eye on that.
My name is Georg Festus, I'm from Denmark. When I came here, I knew very little about match fixing, but I must say that you people have taken my virginity. There are very different problems in different sports, and it seems to me that it is impossible to make guidelines that covers all sports. I would think the only possibility and what should be the next step in fighting match fixing is that the international federations should put in their rules what they think is match fixing. We have seen the example of chess and the NFL, and I come from athletics, and you can find a lot of very different examples where you have to define, is this match fixing or is it not?
And who is your question for? Who is your question for? Who do you ask?
Well, I'm not asking, I'm telling them to do it. but I would like their comment, because I think they have a possible job in making one set of rules in this field. You have to make it according to each sport.
I can make one comment. I think there's been a lot of discussion about codes of conduct, and within a code of conduct there can be a this can be outlined. And I think that the principles that players sign up to and clubs and federations it can be in the code of conduct. I believe the EPFL code of conduct is really quite explicit, and other codes of conduct would be equally explicit.
I'm flattered we've taken the opportunity in this area. That's something I wasn't expecting when I came to the conference. But what I will say is that does show raising awareness, and unfortunately we are still very much in that stage. And Karen will support me on this. I've done work in America on sports betting integrity, and they will not admit there is an issue. And until that happens, as a global situation, we are going nowhere. So I urge you to take what you've learned from myself and other distinguished speakers across the conference on this topic and go and tell people, because we can't do it on our own. But certain jurisdictions will not accept there's an issue, and certain sports will not accept there's a problem. So please, do our job.
This is a question from Klaus Egelund from Expert for Gamze Bal. Since match fixing seems to tarnish an entire country, and I know that the Turkish investigation more or less came from evidence provided from countries outside of Turkey. Do you believe that this case would have come to light if it had only been a Turkish incident, or do you think it would have been swept under the carpet?
Actually, the evidences are not from outside Turkey. The police investigation uncovered the match-fixing case scandal, but there were 7,000 police wiretaps, and all are recorded in Turkey. You mean the Bundesliga German? Yes, but this is not related to it. This is a separate match-fixing scandal. I know what you're talking about. So they are not really related together.
So, and it's been created and manipulated inside Turkey. That just get a punishment. Just one club, two clubs get punished only by the UEFA. And the next question, please.
Please, a question to Kevin. I'm Maxim Utikeev, Russian television. You've told that media and press can write about strange matches. And what is the mechanism of investigation in such matches, and maybe some examples?
So examples of where the media has started a case. So to name several, well, the first one, the major one in the world really was the Pakistan cricket scandal. Cricket will not be a popular sport of knowledge here, but that led to the imprisoning of 3 players, and that was started by a newspaper sting of the now defunct News of the World newspaper. If you look into in football, there have been reports in recent years of spot fixing from former Premier League players. That came out in the press. Only last week in England, in the semi-professional football conference, chairman came to the BBC and said, the FA came and raided our clubs. They said there's an issue, and it's now, we've heard nothing else. And there's been no response from the FA yet. So, as I said, the majority of the good work in this field happens from the media in the UK. And I applaud investigative journalists, some of whom are in this room and who work in the UK for people like the Sunday Times, who continue to act where sport either cannot or will not investigate.
Yeah, but very short, because we have to stop. Coffee break.
Yeah, okay, very short. Okay. João Almeida from the Olympic Committee of Portugal. I have a question to Kevin. What are the main differences you find between the underperformance in the badminton case on the Olympics and, for instance, the underperformance of Spanish basketball team in the group stage to avoid to play against a stronger team in the final stage, or for instance a runner like Usain Bolt who slows down during the heat in the 100 meters competition?
Well, as far as I'm aware, none of those were related to betting offences. But I think I talked yesterday in the main session about the perception of sport.
But the consequences?
The consequences? Well, if you're letting down the ethics and integrity of your sport, then the sanctions should be relatively strong, I think. The badminton players were charged very quickly, and I think the way the Badminton World Federation acted on that case was very good and very swift, because people had paid good money, and this is what it comes down to. We could have a long debate about playing weaker teams in certain competitions as well, as to what duty does sport have to its paying supporters, sponsors and broadcasters. And that is a wider debate to be had outside of this panel, but certainly the sanctions, on a case-by-case basis, after all, they have to be proportionate, and I think fellow panel members mentioned that. But that's a long debate that we can go on for days.
Okay, thanks for our guests and for you to attend. We can go to a coffee break now. Thank you.